But I feel like my entire career over these last 20 years since I graduated from IIT has all been about not just luck. Some people talk about, what drives someone's success. Is it luck? Is it planning? Was it fate? Was it meant to be? And so on, right? And I do tend to think that there is some level of serendipity involved in the evolution of everyone's careers, right? But at the same time, you can't just sit out here waiting for that magical luck to drop in on you. I think you can actually tilt the odds in your favor. And that's why I titled this talk, Attracting Serendipity. So what are the learnings that I have that can be generalized based on my own experiences, right? Because you're not going to live my career. And if I had to go back and rewind 20 years, maybe I could have made a different decision. I might not have lived my career too. So what is it that we can learn about careers that might help you for the next 20 years, and frankly, even me as well? Well, the first thing to realize is that careers these days and in the future are going to be very different from careers in the past, a generation back. This picture shows organisms that some of you might recognize. They're called barnacles. Barnacles make one existential decision in their life. They figure out where they're going to live, and then for the rest of their lives, they're in the same place with their head cemented to a rock. That's how careers used to be in the past, a generation back. You decide that you chose an organization, and then you'd be there until you retired, right? Doesn't happen anymore. That kind of loyalty doesn't exist among employees or among organizations too. And it's actually a good thing. I actually feel that because there is this kind of dynamism in the workforce, it induces a lot more competition for talent, and it prevents certain organizations from just locking in the best people, right? So what are the secrets for surviving in this new environment? Just to show you that I haven't forgotten all the chemical engineering that I learned, let me draw an analogy. So you all know that enzymes act as catalysts for biological reactions. There is a prevailing theory, or there was in the late 1800s, that the way these enzymes would act on these substrates, which are the things that actually go in there and then they change their shape or they create a new protein based on being catalyzed by the enzyme, was that there was a perfect lock and key fit between the substrate and the enzyme. The substrate would go in, it would sit in this exact same place in the enzyme, and then some magical reaction would happen, right? But that didn't explain all the observed phenomena. There were lots of substrates that were bonding to enzymes without actually inducing a reaction, etc. So there's a different theory, which I guess is the more prevailing one, although I could be very dated at this point, called the induced fit theory, which says that there is some kind of interaction between the enzyme and the substrate that allows this to happen. In other words, the jobs aren't static, and neither are people, right? It's the interaction between the two that actually makes you succeed in them. So if you think of a simplistic model, the lock and key theory would say that what you bring as knowledge and what the job requires is certain types of work to be done. And if the lock and key theory holds, then that knowledge would be an exact match for the tasks that need to be done, right? And that is a simplistic model. And I would argue that it's actually much more complex. It's much more like the induced fit. You are more than the knowledge you bring, right? That is one piece that you bring to the table. As you grow in your career, what you'll find is that your traits and behaviors, things like, do you work well in a team? Are you resilient? Are you open to new ideas? Etc., are going to be much more important than the knowledge you possess. So for you to understand what your traits and behaviors are, what your modes for success are, is incredibly critical. You need to know yourself as a person really, really well in order to understand where you're going to flourish, right? It's not just that. Going even further in your career, it's obviously the accumulated experiences that you bring to the table. Now, you might argue about what good does experience actually hold? What does it do? If experience works really well, the idea is that you have better judgment. Because we don't have perfect information to make decisions. You have to rely on judgment at some point. And the idea with experience is that it allows you, because you've seen so many different things, that you have built in some level of pattern recognition to have and exercise good judgment, right? So that is the idea with experience. And the last thing is your network. This again becomes incredibly important. Again, with technical people, sometimes things like networking, etc., take on a bad name. People think that why should I spend time getting to know people? Why should I build a network and so on? And to an extent, I agree. You can't just say I'm attending networking events so that I get to know people and exchange business cards and all of that, right? That doesn't work. But think of the friendships that you've built today. Think of the people you're sitting with right now. I'll guarantee you, just based on my Google experience, where 40% of the hires that we make are through referrals. We think that Googlers are the best people to identify newer Googlers, right? So look at your left and your right. One of those two people is going to help you find a job in the next 20 years. So unless you know which one it is, be nice to both of them. But it's all of these things that are going to help you in your career, right? All of these are equally important as you go forward. What about the job? What does the workplace itself offer more than a job? And in all of our research that my team and I do, I mentioned this already, so I won't go into details, but I want to give you some of the characteristics of what a world-class workplace offers more than a job, right? Being a performance culture is a must. As I said, I would strongly encourage you to ensure that you select workplaces that have a performance culture. Freedom to do what you want, right? And you're not going to have unlimited freedom unless you sort of, build a company yourself. But at the same time, there has to be enough that you feel like you can own something, that you can take ownership, that you have accountability. An open flow of information. You want to make sure that you know what the context is around you, what kinds of problems need to be solved, what are the competitive threats out there, etc. You're not boxed in to just your own world. In our case at Google, what we do is every week on Fridays we have a TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. It's actually moved to Thursdays now so that it's conducive for our international locations. But Larry Page, our CEO, will go up on stage, just like I am here out today, give an update on the business, and then take questions from Googlers, like you sitting out here. And the questions can be anything at all, right? People will ask, hey, what are we doing in China? Or why did we buy Motorola, right? So it's really personal, sort of deep penetrating questions because people just want that open flow of information. Learning orientation. This is one of the key things that, again, differentiates workplaces, right? It is most efficient for workplaces to just say, hey, I have a job that needs to be done. Let me just pay people to get that done. But if they really care about you, they're going to know that you want to learn and grow in your career, that they need to invest sufficient effort in this. This is one of the first budgets to get cut when the companies go through a bad time, learning budgets, right? So again, you want to make sure that the organization has a good learning orientation. And then I'll talk about a couple of things very quickly. Great people managers. You need mentors. You need people who have experience, who can take you through this kind of rapid pattern recognition really well. There are some, these geospatial, geotechnical kind of consulting firms, which are all about figuring out where should you drill for oil, right? And what they do is they have lots of these kinds of maps, and they go through a rapid iteration of educating new entrants in there to help them think about how do you hone your skill to find the next oil well, right? Because it's too expensive to have you out in the field with no clue as to decide where to drill for. And that it needs to be risk enabling. If you have that freedom, and if you're allowed to experiment with something, and if it doesn't go well, if it goes great, of course, everyone is happy, but if it doesn't go well, what does the organization do? Does it help you stay on your feet? Does it penalize you? Does it actually encourage you and say, go out and try one more, right? That is something that you want as well in the environment. So these are the things that you need, and if you put these two together, that I think gives you a great job. But a career is more than a job, right? A career is a series of jobs strung together. In a 30, 40-year career span, you're all going to have maybe 10, 12 jobs, right? And so how do you string all of these together to have a successful one? Here are 5 beliefs that I have, and I won't go into detail in the interest of time. I want to leave some time open for questions as well. But here are some of my thoughts. For your first job, selecting the right industry is much more important than the right organization. Each industry has its own cost structure and economics, and it is very hard for people to move across industries very easily once they have experience in some place. There are some ways out of it. Business school is one easy way out, right? Once you go to business school, it's a clean slate. And that's how I used it, to be honest. I was stuck in this environmental consulting firm, and business school was the only way I was going to get out of that industry. So that is an important concept. The second one is people are in a hurry today. I get lots and lots of resumes. Google gets, we hire a few thousand people every year, and we get 2.2 million resumes. So we get lots and lots of people who are interested. Google is more selective than even the IITs, if you can imagine. So I get lots of resumes which have people who are jumping very, very quickly. Maybe they're attracted by a new title or a 10% higher pay. Don't do that. You're not learning anything. You're shortchanging yourself for the long term, right? My advice to everyone is stay in a job for at least a year after you think you've mastered it, because that is when you're going to repay it back. That's when you're going to get it to the next level. You're going to leave a legacy behind. You always want to be known as the person who is leaving a legacy behind, right? Because remember I told you about the networks that influence your future career. You want people to think, oh, these are the kinds of folks that do amazing work. The third point I have is that you always want to be creating options for yourself. Again, the prevailing notion of career development was, there is this position way up there, and I need to work my way up to the top, right? That's an outdated position, because organizations are very dynamic, and who knows, maybe your boss is going to stay in that role for the rest of your career and his career or her career. Or maybe the organization is going to go through some troubled times, and so there are no positions for you to climb up, etc., right? In a dynamic environment that we face today, what you always want to be doing is think of a tree rather than a column, right? You're always creating options for yourself, and that is what you want to do. If anything goes wrong, aside from your plans, you have 3 other things that you can bank on. The fourth point leads to, something that I said in the last page about how the best workplaces offer lots of learning opportunities. I strongly believe that your career ends when you stop learning. When you say, I know it all, right? I'm now the master of my field. That is when, well, not just your career, I think, your life ends when you stop learning, because there's no more motivation, there's no more desire to conquer something. So don't ever get to that stage. And then finally, this is probably a fairly cliched statement, but you want to enjoy the journey, not the destination, right? And the reason being that once you get up on top, and if you're on top of a peak, guess what the view is going to be like? You just see other peaks, right? And so you then be tempted to go ahead and climb something else as well. So you've got to enjoy the journey, otherwise you're never going to be satisfied. But if you pull all of this together, it leads to fulfillment. which we haven't really talked about so far, right? And I want to end on that note, which is you are the only person who can decide what fulfills you. Is it money? Is it power? Is it prestige? Is it leaving a mark? Is it having impact on the world? Right? And certainly it's not any one of those things. You could have combinations, but it's very hard to find out